Here we go. Excellent. So I am
Perfect.
so excited to introduce Megan. She is the amazing CEO of One Stone Creative and a podcast guru.
Podcast guru is a very flattering term, and I will take it and wear it proudly. So thank you so much, Kim. It is much kinder than what I'm usually known by, which is a podcast nerd, because this is my primary area of interest. It's what I've been doing for the last 7 years. And I'd love to I've got a whole presentation, but I'd love to get a little bit of a sense of where you both are at in terms of, is a podcast something that you're vaguely aware of that happens on the internet? Do you have one? Do you want one? Do you love them? Kind of where are you with that?
I'll let Bill go. And
Okay, well, I'm actually doing my first podcast in a month.
Yes.
So
Are you going to be a guest or are you the host?
I'm going to be a guest. It's
Amazing.
with the Syosset Library. She's going to interview me about my book.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes, I'm psyched.
Very cool. Jean, what about you?
so I have been on a few podcasts before. That's Bill's book behind me, by the way. Little push for Bill there. So yeah, I mean, definitely here to learn and take away some good advice and suggestions for our other authors as well as for myself. So I appreciate you coming today.
Okay, sounds great. So then I will basically I'll run through the presentation that I've got prepared. I'll stop a couple of times to put you on the spot, make you uncomfortable, ask you questions, make you answer them.
Oh, great.
That's going to be a lot of fun. And then we will have time for Q&A at the end. So type into the chat if you've got any questions. I'll stop and check for them periodically. But otherwise, I'm just going to go and let me know if you'd like to talk about anything that I'm talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Screen 2. Can everybody see Podcasting for Authors, how authors can amplify their reach, sales, and community?
Yes.
Marvelous. Yep. Then let's jump right into it. I'll start with a little more of an introduction of myself. So as Kim so kindly shared, I'm Megan Dougherty, a podcast guru, otherwise known as the co-founder of One Stone Creative. We're a podcast production agency, and we have been creating shows for business owners of different types since 2017. So about 7 years now we've been doing this. Over the years, we've also started a new website, podcastingforbusiness.com, which is all about podcasting in support of an existing business. We do an annual research report called the State of Business Podcasting Report, and we run a Podcasting for Business conference every fall called the Podcasting for Business Conference. Naming, as you can possibly tell, is not our strong suit. We keep that for the podcast and like to stay pretty practical with how we are naming ourselves and our products. So podcasting is a pretty big field. There's a lot that goes into it. And so I want to kind of just put on a framework for what we're going to be talking about today. And the first is, should you have a podcast? Deciding whether or not you should podcast as an author, as a business owner. It's a pretty big decision because podcasting is not the easiest thing in the world. It's not the cheapest thing in the world. So if you're going to go into doing it, you want to make sure that you've got a really good idea of the type of value it's going to bring to you as an author and as a business owner. And then assuming that you're not completely horrified and fleeing at the reality of podcasting we're going to be looking at, we'll talk about what separates like a really good podcast from a really amazing one. Because if you're going to put in all of this work into the project, then you want it to be as good as possible. And then we're going to look kind of specifically at how, as an author, you can use a lot of the work that you've already done, developing your book, your network, doing all of the launching stuff to make a podcast a lot easier to integrate into your business and to your workflow. So I'm going to jump right into things with, should you have a podcast? So I know, Bill, you're getting ready to be on your first podcast. You've been on a couple, and you've probably been on at least one meeting or Zoom chat or LinkedIn conversation lately where someone's like, they mentioned they're starting a podcast. They're saying, maybe you should have a podcast. I was on this podcast. Have you heard this podcast? It's what all the cool kids are doing, or at least it seems like it's what all the cool kids are doing. And it seems like there's a new one starting in every industry every couple of days. And the math backs that up. There are millions, literally, of podcasts, not all currently active, but they are out there. And because they're such a great way to serve businesses in different fashions, it's one of the reasons they're so popular. But most of them fizzle out really, really early. So podcasts get started with a lot of enthusiasm, but they're started with more enthusiasm than strategy. And so it's really hard to maintain that. And the motivation kind of lessens over time, and people get less excited about it. They're not seeing the value from it. And so they do what we call pod fading, is they podcast for a little while and then sort of just the project dies and goes onto the back burner and never goes anywhere. I'm sure that's never happened with a book or anything else that you've worked on, but it happens in podcasting from time to time. And so there are situations where a podcast is a really efficient and effective solution to just a whole bunch of different business challenges. And that's what we want to determine before deciding whether to do it or not. We want to make sure that it's actually going to help the business rather than be a distraction from possibly more critical business activities. So the way you're going to do this, and we're not going to start with what podcasting can do. We're not going to start with why podcasting is great. We're going to start with you and your business. So what are your goals for your writing work, for your business, any products or services that you sell in the next 6 to 12 months? That's the timeline I look on when evaluating a podcast. And if you want to go ahead and type into the chat what your goals are in the next 6 to 12 months, that we'll be calling back to them in a couple of minutes, and it will be pretty handy if you've got them written down. So go ahead, write them there. I'll read out any if they're coming in. Otherwise, I will get into our super cool podcasting framework, which I'm a very big fan of, and which will demonstrate to you amply that I am truly a podcast nerd. Sip a little water as well. Okay, so I'm just gonna have to be forced to put someone on the spot later. That's completely fine. If you want to play that way, I can play that way. But let me tell you a little bit about this framework that we've developed, my business partner and I, over the last 7 years of working with podcasts for different business owners. We call them the Business Podcast Blueprints. And they are the 5 kind of high-level archetypes or prime directives, if you will, for having a podcast within a business or for business purposes. So they are relationship building, and these are shows that are designed to expand your professional network. Audience engagement, which are shows that serve an audience or new traffic that you already have, so anyone who's already aware of you for one reason or another. There are thought leadership podcasts. These are shows that establish you and your brand as an authority in the space. There are conversion podcasts that primarily exist to convert a listener from one type of relationship with you to another type of relationship with you. And then there are content podcasts. Some podcasts only exist to create content, and that is completely fine. So the reason we start with the Business Podcast Blueprints is because it's important to have sort of a main single reason to podcast. There are lots of things that you can do, and we're going to start to talk about a bunch of different individual outcomes and metrics that live within each of these that you can apply and you can optimize a show for. But you want to make sure that you've got one prime directive so that whenever you're making a strategic decision about the show, like should I have guests, should I have sponsors, you want to be able to say, well, will it help me engage my audience? Or will it help me convert people from one state of relationship to another? Or will it help me establish thought leadership? If the answer is yes, you can pursue that tangent and you can optimize for that particular thing. If the answer is no, then you want to make sure that you don't do it, so you're not kind of doing work that is in conflict with your main goal. So we'll come back to the blueprints a little bit later, but I want to go into some of kind of the individual outcomes or metrics that kind of live within each of these. And as you're looking at them, and if you think, I really want a relationship building podcast, but I like this metric from conversion, you can mix and match as long as there's no conflict. And what I want you to keep an eye out for as I go through these are the goals that you wrote down. Because to decide whether or not you should podcast for your business, you want to make sure that a podcast can do the things that you need. And that's what we're going to look at right away. So I'll go through each of them, starting with relationship building. So this is one of my favorite podcast types, if I'm allowed to have a favorite podcast type. And again, so a relationship building podcast is one that primarily exists to get you talking to other people, generally by having guests and by inviting those guests onto your podcast to talk to them and then nurturing and developing that relationship into something else. So some of the ways that you can optimize a show or things that you can get out of a relationship building podcast are professional contacts, people that you need to make referrals to, who could send you leads and inquiries for your different services, who can swap guest appearances with you. You're there on your podcast, you go on theirs. People you could develop partnerships with, maybe joint venture or affiliate partnership if you sell services of that type, and to trade referrals back and forth. So these all work really, really neatly within a relationship building style podcast. Next are audience engagement podcasts. And these, again, are shows that are about giving an audience who's already aware of you. Maybe it's traffic that you've got coming in from other sources. Maybe it's after you've got paid traffic campaigns running, or you do keynotes, or you want to keep people interested between books. An audience engagement podcast is a really great way to keep yourself top of mind with people while you are maybe not directly creating one-to-one work that you can do with them. So some things that you can optimize for with this type of show are, oh no, I've got my, you can see where I copy pasted my slide, everybody. Sorry, I've got the same bullet list there. What you can do with an audience engagement podcast, you can look for, don't worry, I've got it written down. Perfect. Just a little up here. So sorry, everybody.
You're good.
Perfect. So what you can look at for an audience engagement podcast are going to be your social shares, mentions on DMs, labor cost savings. That's a really fun one. If you find yourself answering the same questions from your clients a lot, you can answer those questions in a podcast and then refer them to the episode again and again. And that can actually save a lot of time.
Nice.
It's also great at increasing your customer lifetime value, an audience building podcast, because when you are staying top of mind, the people who are listening to every episode, those are your super fans. So when you have a new book, a new product release, a new anything, they are going to be very happy to buy it and, buy again and again. And even, maybe even fund your podcast through something like a Patreon or through the other paid subscription levels of podcasting. And an audience engagement podcast is also the one you want to be considering if you do want to go the sponsorship route. Most of the other ones are not actually a great fit for business owners or most business owners shouldn't really look at sponsorship from external companies because that's valuable airtime that should be going onto your own stuff. But an audience engagement podcast can be a really good fit for sponsorship. Now, if I go back to my main presentation, there we go. We can move on to thought leadership, which has the correct bullet points. So a thought leadership podcast is all about, it's your take a stance piece of content. This is about getting your ideas out there, your IP, and sharing your information with the world. And some of the things that you can optimize a thought leadership podcast for are backlinks, media mentions and citations, quotations and references in different publications. These can be print or online. A good thought leadership podcast where you are really kind of going out there and being one of the voices that other people look at in your industry. It's going to be invitations and opportunities to speak at events, to run presentations like this one, and just opportunities to get in front of audiences. And thought leadership shows also can really shorten sales cycle length, which is really fun because when people listen to a podcast, they get to know you. And they get to know you in what feels like a really intimate way on their end. And so then when you do get onto a sales or discovery call with them, it's not, do we get to know each other, see if we like each other? I'm going to ask you all of these really detailed questions about your business. It's when can we start working together? Because they already know you and they like what you're doing. So going on to conversion podcasts, and these are the shows that exist to kind of usually as part of sales funnels or like list building funnels. They basically get people to take an action of some kind and go from one type of relationship to another. So for that, you'll be looking at landing page conversions. The growth of your community or your membership can improve and increase over time. Direct sales, some can be used for product or service or membership and community sales if that's the sort of paid community that you're running. You might be getting more social media followers and increasing your recurring revenue by doing all of the above. And finally, we have got content podcasts. Now, of course, you're going to get content out of whatever kind of podcast that you run. It's just a natural side effect of the activity. But you can also run a podcast just for content if that is a fit for your business. If you find that kind of as the leader of your company or as, the author who is the public face of your company and the work that you do, it can be really hard to create all of the content and give all of the materials that you need to other team members to write the emails, to create the blog posts, to do all the social media posting. Your podcast can be a great way for you to fill that flywheel with content from you that other people can then turn into other things. So for that, you'd want to look at new blog content you're creating, your SEO. You can go up in the search engine results, get found more easily on Google. You can create content for guest posts, your social media, for sales, and even use your podcast to develop large projects like your next book or a course that you might want to sell. So I'd love to know, as I was kind of going through these lists, did you recognize in any of these lists or within any of these high-level blueprints goals that you had on your list for what you need in your business? Different relationships that you need, different kinds of exposure to people, different kinds of reputation, I'd love to type into the chat if you've got anything that kind of was a match. A podcast can do this, and it's something that you need. We'll open that up here. Bill wants to sell books. You might be looking at conversion. Might also be looking at audience engagement. Can be really good for that. Perfect. Well, I'm going to assume that everyone is just like, yes, I would like everything on this list. We're going to let's have it all. Did you see your goals? So let's assume that you have, got your little short list. I like 2 to 3 goals for a podcast. Seems to be a really good number to have at any one time. And then if that's the case, then you've got a pretty good reason to expect that the time and energy and money that you invest in a podcast is going to pay off in a way that you can measure for your business. And that measurement is really, really important, because another thing that contributes to pod fade really, really actively is that the podcast, it feels good. Like, it feels like it's working. Everyone likes it. We get great feedback about it. And it seems like kind of our sales and engagement numbers are all up, but we don't actually know why. And because you can't put real value on what the show is doing, it's really hard to justify continuing it as a business expense, because, as we're going to talk about in just a moment, it's not a small investment of time and energy or money. And you're going to be spending one of those things. If you podcast, it's going to be your time or your energy or your money. So let's get into that a little bit, because podcasting can take up a lot of time if you let it. And while it's a really high value and efficient marketing activity, it's not an easy or a low effort one. So there's a lot of things that you kind of need to have in place or be ready to build into your workflow. And then there's things that are nice to have to really level up and get even more value out of it. So we're going to look at both of these. The absolute requirements that you must have in order to successfully podcast are these. You have to like talking, ideally to other people. If you hate talking, this is not the platform for you. There's really no way around that. You just have to so you can hear it in your voice. Like, with I'm going to cover my camera for a second, and you can hear I'm now sort of frowning, and I'm not very happy, and I'm just talking, and this is not pleasant. But if I start to smile, you can hear it in my voice, and that really is true all the time. So if you can like it, you don't have to love it, but you should at least like it. Next thing you kind of need to have is being comfortable with a variety of different technology platforms. And when I'm saying all of these, the requirements that you need to have access to, you don't necessarily need to do them personally. You can hire just about anything except the talking to be done for you. But you should have comfort with different technology platforms like Apple Podcasts, your website backend, the different social media platforms you're using, a podcast host, which is where the episodes live on the internet, and it's from there they get distributed to the podcast players, and also an audio recording interface of some kind. So some people record their podcasts on Zoom. Do not record your podcasts on Zoom. You want to be using something like a Riverside or Squadcast or Zencaster. It's a dual-ended recorder, much higher quality. Same experience of recording, much better output. In terms of time, you want to make sure that you have about 2 hours of prep and recording time for each 45 minutes of finished content. And this is so that you've got time to prepare your questions, or even if it's a solo episode, to make sure that your script is good, to practice it a few times so that you don't sound like you're reading too much. You can get away with a little, but not too much. And you can, you want to research your guests, make sure that you're being a really good host and you know about them, you've got good questions. An assistant can help you out with this, but some of this is going to be work that you as the host will have to do. You want to have a good quality mic and a good room to record in as much as possible. A few years ago, you could get away, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, you could really get away with kind of scratchy, not great audio. People's standards are getting higher, and because there's other podcasts in your space, you're not the only podcaster talking about your topic. They'll trade you in for someone who has better quality audio if it's not kind of high level. For editing, you want to, the kind of standard for editing, say again, for that 45 minutes of finished audio, it's going to be about 3 to 5 hours of editing time. And again, that can be you. If you are one of those, I don't even know the word to describe audio engineers, but they have just something about them that makes them really into it. And if that's you, amazing. You're going to really enjoy that 3 to 5 hours. There's also lots of highly skilled professionals working at all different price points for you to hire should you need them. You also do need to have, and I do list this one as a requirement, you want to have at least an hour to promote every episode that you put out there, because you can make the best podcast in the world. And if you don't tell anybody about it, nobody's going to know about it, unless you have like the strongest SEO game of all time. But, for the most part, you have to get out there and tell people about it, or have a member of your team get out there and tell people about it. And you also want to make sure that you've got your goals written down and you've got a mechanism to track them, and that you are regularly kind of updating that tracking mechanism, whether it's a database, a spreadsheet. It can be a whiteboard on your wall, as long as you are regularly seeing, hey, is this thing that we set out to do actually working for the purpose that we wanted to do it? Those are sort of the requirements. And as you can see, that can, make a really big difference in your workflow. It's not a small amount of work. And so you want to make sure that those benefits, those goals that you have are going to be worth that investment. If, say, if I've got for my podcast, the company show, I know that, it's sort of a lead gen, it's relationship building. I'm trying to meet people who will ideally make referrals to me. It takes me this much time, or I've got team members working on it. But if I know I'm going to close 2 new deals a year based on my podcast, that covers all of the cost and all of my time. So it's a very good investment for me to be working on that. And that's the kind of evaluation you want to be able to make. And you can't make that kind of evaluation unless you have the data. So you must collect the data. Now, let's talk about the stuff that is nice to have. These are things that aren't going to sort of make or break your podcast, but they are going to level up all of the results that you get out of it. So if possible, you should have a couple of hours after each episode to repurpose the content into other things. It's probably going to be really good content. You can turn that into a blog post. You can turn that into a social media series, an email. There's basically no limit to the different ways you can repurpose content, but it's one of the things in all of podcast, it is the easiest to put on the back burner. Hands down. It is so easy to not do the repurposing, but it really gives you that long tail value. So if you can do it, you absolutely should. Another one that you should get, if possible, is feedback on what you're doing. So a lot of us podcasters work in isolation. I'm sure as writers, you know nothing about that. But getting feedback on the episodes that you do, and listen to your own episodes. It's painful. It sucks. I know, but it's the fastest way to get better. You also want to pitch yourself on other podcasts, because, how we mentioned that you want to be spending your time promoting. That can be time pitching yourself to appear on other podcasts. It's much easier to get someone who already listens to podcasts in your topic area to click subscribe on the app they're already using than to teach them how to use Apple Podcasts and kind of get a whole new listener into your orbit. So that's a really great strategy for any podcaster. We recommend it a lot. You also want to, if you can, listen to other shows in your industry. What are the standards for how long episodes are, for the type of guests that you have, the type of questions that you ask? You don't want to copy or like become just like someone else, but I think, getting a good sense of what is the industry standard and where am I like it and where do I differentiate myself from it can be really, really valuable. Another thing I really like to do is, if you have a podcast that has guests, spend some time creating some materials for them to share it. Give them a graphics card, write them an email, write them a couple of social media shares. It just makes it really pleasant to be a guest. They may or may not use them. A lot of guests don't share, often for very good reasons, but it really looks good on you as the host to be organized, to have that together, to be being a good host really is great, especially for relationship building. And finally, if you've got a community around your podcast, if you do have these listeners, spend time with them, because I wasn't kidding. They feel like they know you. You're going to, enter a conversation on Facebook, and they're going to be talking much more, with much more familiarity than you might feel is appropriate, because they've been listening to you, and it really does feel like you've got a close relationship, even if it's one-sided. I run into this as a producer all of the time. I'll talk to a client, even a fairly new one, and I've just been spending hours every week with their voice in my ear. And, acting maybe a little more familiar than I should in a professional context, but everyone knows what that's like. So pretty understandable. So hopefully, having heard all of that, you're thinking, okay, these goals, this is going to be worth all of that work. Or perhaps you're thinking, nope, I'm good. Both fine. It's good to know now before you get into the project. But again, I am going to make the assumption that you've read all this and you're just like, I can't wait. I've got a team who is ready. I've got the content ideas. I'm ready to go. But let's talk about standing out from the pack. Because as we talked about, there are lots and lots of podcasts out there. There are anything you want a podcast on, you can find a podcast on. And you're going to be one of many when you're out there. So there are kind of categories, rankings or hierarchies of podcasts, if you will. There are it's the garbage, most podcasts. They're the ones that don't get very far, but there's a lot of them. And then there's ones that are pretty good and they've got their solid audience of key fans. And that can be plenty. If maybe you don't need thousands and thousands of listeners, you need the right 15. And if they're the 15 who are buying your stuff, that's fantastic. But no matter what your kind of goals are in terms of size or scope, or the scale of how many people are going to be hearing this, you want to have a handle on what we call the 3 C's of podcasting, because they're going to make your content, whyever you're making it and for whomever you're making it, as good as possible. So the 3 C's of podcasting are content, charisma, and connection. And I want to go through each of these a little bit really quickly first. Content is, of course, the content that you are creating and how it's presented. Charisma is the magnetism of the people who are involved in the show. And connection is the emotional attachment between you and your audience. So content is what you're doing. Charisma is you and your guest within the show, that relationship. And connection is the relationship with you external to your show, the people who are listening to it. So in a little bit more detail, I want to start with content because, as content is king, that's what we all say, and it is true. While you can't hide bad content, even with great quality production, bad content is bad content, and people notice it. So you want to think when you're creating podcast episodes, you want to get a little bit beyond just the words that you're going to say in an episode. You've got to be intentional about why you're saying them and think about who the listener is going to be and what they're going to be able to do because of the things that you're saying. So your content has to have a reason for existing other than you wanting to say something. It's got to help the audience in some way achieve a goal or a desire or learn or experience something of their own. Because I said, there's already lots of content out there. There's lots of competitions. And so every episode, to the extent possible, and when you get into podcasting, there are going to be weeks when you cannot put this much thought into it. That's okay. We've all been there. But as a rule, you want to make sure that you are thinking about, what is this episode? What do I want people to take away from this? So when I'm planning an episode for my show, and I share this with my guests when I have them, I set an intention for the episode. Is, this is the episode I would like every listener to leave with a solid strategy for how to promote their episodes on LinkedIn. And that really gets us, me and my guests, both in the framework of, okay, this is what's going to help my specific audience with this specific topic, with this specific effort. And it also kind of helps with the charisma, because charisma is, again, that relationship that you have either with yourself as the speaking as a solo host, or when you've got a guest and you are interacting with them as the host. So we'll mainly talk about the hosting variety when you have guests and you're talking to them, because there's 2 main types of charisma. We call them rock stars and wingmen. Rock stars are the stars. They're what you turn into a podcast for. Often they will be the host of a solo show, or they'll be like the host of a generalist podcast. If you've ever seen the Joe Rogan episode, he's a rock star. He can talk to anyone, and it's going to be interesting because his audience kind of want his opinion. The guest can be anyone. It doesn't matter so much. Wingman, on the other hand, that's where I would put myself as a host, because we set that intention for the audience, and I'm setting that intention so that my guest can look really good. I'm setting them up to look amazing because I'm building a relationship with my guest. What I want to do is shine the spotlight on them and their expertise to serve the audience. So there's no wrong answer here. You can be a rock star, you can be a wingman. You're probably going to be one naturally. More rock stars are born than made. It's hard to learn rock star. Wingman you can learn to do. If you don't naturally, just really think about how can I best help this expert help my audience? And that's going to create a really good charisma and interaction between the 2. Finally, connection. And again, this is between you internally and externally, the people who are outside listening to the show. So you set yourself up for this really, really well by putting the intention in the content and kind of understanding and playing up your best type of charisma. The next thing you want to do is actually make yourself available. When you're doing broadcast style media, and that's what a podcast is, it's one-to-many speaking. Those many are all individuals on the other side, and they're building a relationship with you. So any time that you can spend with them, engaging with them on social, on the various podcast players that do allow some kind of interaction. If you've got a Facebook group, if you're out there in the world, Instagram is really big for podcasters, just spending time with them. And creating those genuine relationships, that's one of the things that adds a lot of value to your show as a business owner. If you are leveraging those relationships in other ways, or if you're going the sponsorship route, it's that relationship and that connection that sponsors want to buy, because you become the value that you're selling in that case, and the relationship that you have is becoming the value. So 3 C's, content, charisma, and connection. You can get away with doing 2 of these really well. You don't necessarily need all 3 to have a great, successful podcast, but you do need at least 2. So pick the ones you want to focus on. You can always add more later. Perfect. So now we have our reason for podcasting. We have the basics of what's going to make a good podcast from the content and relationship standpoints. Now we have to talk about audio quality, because audio quality is very, very important, as we've touched on a little bit. And there are 2 sides to good audio quality when it comes to podcasting, and neither of them are post-production. Okay, post-production happens after, and even the best sound engineer in the world can only do so much with that audio. So the things that you really want to be focusing on when you're creating the content are your mic technique and the acoustic treatment of the space that you are in. So your mic technique starts with choosing the right mic. You cannot use your laptop mic to record a podcast. I mean, you can. There's nothing like physically preventing you from doing it, but it doesn't sound good. It is really worth investing in a good mic. Even if you are just planning a guesting strategy, you want to sound good. And so some really great brands are Shure, Rode, Blue, Audio-Technica. They're all good quality. I've got a little Shure here. I'll pop it up so you can see it. This is a mic. It just plugs right into the computer. Really easy to use, very high quality for the price. And so you want to make sure you've chosen just a good mic, and then you want to get it in the right location. So for this mic, I'll show you really quickly. It's a little below me while I'm doing a presentation, but for like an audio recording, it's about 6 inches finger width away from my face. I'm talking right into the top of it. The fun thing is, this is not standard. Every mic is different. You get to talk into different places. But there is a trick to finding out the best way to use your own mic. It is going to YouTube, typing in your model number and how to use. You will find a gearhead. Podcasting is full of gearheads, and they will give you explicit details on how and why to use your mic correctly. So that is very worth the 15 minutes it will take to do it. Once you've got that, you want to make sure that as much as possible, the room you're recording in is sound treated. Now, you can't always do this. Sometimes you are just restricted by location, such is life, but echo is really hard to deal with in post-production. There's not much people can do with echo. So this is a video presentation where now you can see me. So I haven't kind of treated my room the way I normally would if I'm just doing an audio presentation. You can see a little blanket on the chair behind me. That goes on the floor. I've got a t-shirt next to me that goes over my second monitor. I've got curtains next to me that I draw. And all of those are nice, mushy, soft, fluffy things that absorb sound waves. You can see the little diamonds behind me. Those are foam pads. So anything that absorbs sound and doesn't let those sound waves echo back to you is going to improve your audio. The better quality your mic, the less you have to worry about that. But the more echoey your room, just remember that the enemy of sound is big, wide, flat spaces. So minimalism, terrible for sound. Very fashionable, not good for audio. I like to tell people, just channel your inner 14-year-old and toss clothes everywhere if you have to. If you're not recording the video, it doesn't have to be fancy. A surprising number of very high-level podcasters actually do record in their closets. There are great acoustics in a closet. So the other thing you want to watch out for is, you can probably hear I'm sinning right now audio wise because my chair is squeaking. I don't know if you can hear it, but I can hear it. And if I can hear it, it's quite likely that my mic can hear it. So we're going to have to address that. That's kind of the little thing that you want to be thinking about, making sure. It is a good rule of thumb. If you can hear it, your mic might be able to hear it. So pets, children, traffic going nearby. Although at some point you're going to record and the neighbors are going to change their windows. It's going to happen. We've all been there. People are fairly forgiving if it's once in a while, but your standards should be pretty good. So that's the basics of good audio. If you can kind of take care of that and make sure that what you're sending to your post-production team is as good as possible, you're going to be great. And oh gosh, I'm sorry, I'm running on and on, everybody. I should get right into talking about for your book. But just quick, how's everyone doing? Are we having a good time? Am I boring you to death?
Doing good.
Doing good.
Okay.
Info. Thank you.
Awesome. So I warned you, nerd.
I think we're all a little bit nerdy.
Excellent.
You're not alone in this group.
Amazing. Amazing. Because I do want to make sure that we've got some time here to go into leveraging the process as your book, because as authors, you've got some pretty awesome extra stuff when you're going into podcasting. So let's jump right in, because your book is the foundation here for what we're doing with your podcast. Well, your book can be the foundation. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that you've already got some expertise established. You've done the time. You've put in the work. You wrote the dang book. So you're not starting from absolute scratch as a podcaster. You don't have to build your reputation from ground up. You've gotten out there. You have met people. You've talked about it. You've written it down. You've explained it in good ways. And all of that can translate really, really beautifully into your podcast. You've also launched before. So launching a podcast is one of the hardest things out there, but it's not as hard as a book launch. I've been involved in both. Launching a podcast is easier. So if you can launch a book, you can launch a podcast. There are just about as many moving parts. But in terms of, connecting with audience, writing the emails, doing the socials, having the party, all of those things that you have done before, you can do again as a podcaster. Now, of course, as we mentioned, networking is one of the really big key goals that why a lot of people podcast, and you probably did a bit of that when you were getting ready for your book as well. I would bet dollars to donuts that if you were thinking of starting a podcast to support your book, there were people who contributed to the writing of it or to the promoting of it who would be delighted to join you on your show to kick it off as a guest. So you've got that networking already started, and you can start leveraging those relationships, making them deeper, and pivoting them in new directions. And you've also hopefully got a built-in goal, because there was a reason that you wrote your book. And in the absence of other business goals, you can just have the exact same goal for your podcast as you did for the book. And then the two can work together and support each other in helping you move your career as a writer, or whatever other products or services that you're selling forward. Now, let's talk about some more specific advantages that authors have. We worked with a lot of authors over the year, which is why we've been able to dig into some of these a little. Because you can also use a podcast for a lot of different other ways within your business. You can work on your next book. You can promote the work that you've already done. You can gather material, do your research. You can kind of foster conversations around your topic, become more of a known entity in your space, and you can really nurture the relationship that you have with your audience, and turn them into more dedicated fans, those top of mind people who are excited to buy everything. And you can network with influencers to promote their work and your work, and exchange that back and forth, and generate new leads to grow your business. And all of these are a lot of fun. Let's go through them just in a little bit more detail each. So you can use a podcast to write your next book. And if you're one of those people who struggles with the amount of writing a book, and I'm currently writing my first one, it's hard. It's a lot of work. And so I shamelessly use podcast episodes as drafts of my first content, because it's work that's already been done, or it's work that serves two purposes out of the gate of doing it. So putting in the time to figure out, like, say, a podcast outline, a content calendar for a year. Each episode can be, 1 to 5, 6, 7, 8,000 words, a single episode. That adds up pretty quickly, and it's nicely chunked into bite sizes over the course of a year. So that can be a really nice way to get more content out there. And once you've got your book out into the world, a lot of attention, of course, goes to promoting it. And podcast tours can be a really, really fun way, not just to get your own book out there while being the kind of subject of a tour. You can host tours on your podcast as well and network that way, which can be a lot of fun, and kind of become a source not just for your own content, but if you want to really take that wingman persona and shine the light on other authors as well, that can be a fantastic thing to grow your overall prestige. Podcasting can be a great way to gather source material. If you need to research different topics, different themes, if there are areas of practice that are really interesting to your audience, but that you're not personally an expert in, boom, podcast interview. I sometimes call podcasts, they're the magic calendar openers. People who would never give you the time of day otherwise, when you say, hey, would you be on my podcast? They're just like, yeah, absolutely. My people will contact your people, and then you're talking to them, and it's fantastic. And it can be a really nice way to get personal stories, anecdotes, just living examples of the kind of things that you're talking about that you can, again, put into your business in an evergreen fashion that people can always find and use and enjoy. Then you can foster conversations about your topic. So if you've ever wished that you knew what people were saying about your book, if people took it away and understood it the way you wanted to, you can find out by talking about it on your podcast and then engaging with your audience about it. People love to have these kind of back and forth conversations. So you can even interview readers if you want to. They're like, depending on the type of your podcast and the way that you are kind of promoting it and presenting it, you can really just absolutely deepen your connection with fans and get all of this feedback that can sometimes be really hard to get, all while you are creating content that is serving other purposes in your business. So it really just all does roll into this wonderfully efficient way of building community, of creating different things. It's a lot of fun. I also really love podcasting from testing new content. So if you've got an idea that maybe for a new way of explaining something, a new case study or a new use case for something that you're selling that you want to try, test it out in your podcast. Get someone to come on live with you, try out the idea. It really is this fertile ground where you can experiment. And especially when you're a newer show, before you have the burden of fame, you can do whatever you want. There's no expectations yet. So you can really play with the formats. Yes, and as I've touched on briefly, promoting your book and your podcast is basically its own job. That's why there are so many professionals who work in this space offering the services, because it's a job that is difficult and requires a lot of effort. Sometimes it's very worth working with an expert on. But when you're the host of a podcast, all of a sudden you're kind of going to be the influencer, and you're going to start to find that people are approaching you for the same thing that you might have approached other people for in the past. And then you can, of course, grant it or not as you desire, but it does put you on a more equal footing. For absolutely, I'd love to promote your book. Why don't you promote mine? And it really can go that way very, very beautifully. And all of this combines together to grow your business. So there's very few elements of podcasting that can't be leveraged in one way or another. And I do think authors are particularly well placed to be able to do that. And I want to talk about one particular way that they are, and that is when it comes down to topics and editorial calendar. So we'll get even more granular if you'll provide me another 5 minutes, and then I promise I'll stop. So I want to talk about this process that we use often with our author clients called exploding content. And so this is where we look at, sometimes you get into podcasts and you think, what am I going to talk about? A book is a project that has a beginning and an end, and you say a certain amount of things and then it's done. A podcast, unless you're doing just a season, can go on forever. So what are you going to talk about? You've already done the work. I promise that you already have. So what you want to do is create basically a list of topics that are related to what you do. And you can even just run down your table of contents and use them for this list of topics. And you'll get yourself a year or two of episode ideas. So what you want to do is identify a big list of categories of things that you can podcast about. Like those that we just mentioned, maybe ideas that are interesting to you, problems that you solve, topics that you address, different customer avatars that you have, or reader avatars that you have, different services that you offer. You just want to have yourself kind of a big list of subject categories. And then you want to develop your own list of questions that you can ask about each of them. So what I've got here is just an example. Your questions could be whatever is most appropriate for you and your business, but you want to be able to ask these questions about each category of idea or topic that you're talking about. So the idea, who's an expert in that idea? Who has experienced that problem? And go through each question multiple times for each category. We'll use an example here. I did meditation as a really quick one. So we've got meditation. Who's an expert in meditation? Who has experienced meditation? Who else wrote about it? What else is interesting about it? What is similar or opposite to it? And then I answered it multiple times for each question. So who is an expert in meditation? Well, therapists, doctors, instructors, and gurus of different types. Each one of those could be a different podcast episode. Who else has written about meditation? Well, maybe John Doe, Jane Dee, and Edgar Adams. Each of those I can invite onto the podcast, and that's another 3 episodes right there. What is similar or opposite to meditation? Well, therapy, exercise, journaling are similar. Impulsivity is opposite. So let's talk about all of those and make them podcast episodes. If you do this for every item on your table of contents, you're going to be podcasting for a long time. And it's all going to be interesting, relevant content. So this is just a little process that we like to do, but I find a lot of fun. And it really is a nice way to keep the creative juices flowing. Not every one of these episodes is going to be a winner. Some will be real stinkers, but there's going to be some gems in there as well. So it's worth doing. So I'd like to check in again. I have reached the end, and I think I've used up every scrap of time that Kim has allowed me. It's like, you should see what I cut from this presentation. But so I'm just gonna, how are you feeling? Are you excited? Are you inspired? Are you really glad that you are a writer and not someone who does, broadcast media? How are you doing?
I actually have a question.
Sure.
So as I'm getting, I'm writing this down. I don't know if I want to do a podcast because Kim and Gene will tell you that I'm pretty technically challenged with a lot of things. So you're saying that I'm not going to be using the microphone off my computer. So I have a date for my podcast, but I don't have anything specific. Like, will she give me the questions in advance? Will she tell me what she's going to want to talk about? Should I go out and buy a computer? Should I think about, like, is she going to be filming me Zoom wise? Do I ask that? Or do I go sit in my closet and record there because that's where it's going to sound the best?
All excellent questions. And I wish I could tell you there was an industry standard that everyone followed, but every host is different, and every host is going to be putting in different amount of effort and kind of different amounts of communication with their guests in advance. There are kind of two schools of thought when it comes to questions in advance. Some people believe that it makes for a better conversation when everyone has a chance to prepare. Some people think that it's off the cuff. It's going to be a more honest, open, and real conversation if there's no preparation. It's absolutely acceptable to ask and say, hey, will you be sending me questions in advance so I can prepare? I think the very best hosts will ask you what you prefer, but not many do that. In terms of your audio, for your very first podcast guest appearance, if you're still thinking about, do I even want to do this? I wouldn't buy anything, except maybe a little like lavalier mic. You can get one for $20 or $30. And often they can plug into your phone if that's what you're using. If you don't want to buy a computer, if you don't, have one that you use for this, that will it'll give you it'll level up your quality. And then you won't have to sit in your closet. So you can record in your comfortable desk.
No, because I'm thinking about, like, because this room that I'm in now, I could hear the echo. I mean, it's a pretty big room and I can actually hear the echo. So I just don't want that to be feedback on her, because and then the other thing that you gave me an idea for was to go and listen to some of her podcasts.
Very good idea. Very
so
good
that
idea.
I could get a sense of what, because she's from the Syosset Library, and she's like interviewing Eric Larson this month. And he's like a big time author. And then there's little old me in my book, which is soon to be a New York Times bestseller. And a major motion picture starring Matthew Broderick as Grandpa Joe. Anyway, I'm just manifesting that as I keep saying that.
Absolutely.
So I don't know where I went with that. So anyway, you think I should get a lavalier microphone as opposed to like a real big, huge setup? And that's
I mean, while you're still testing the water with podcasting, don't spend a lot of money.
Okay.
But a little lav mic that will it's kind of the cheapest and easiest level up that you can get. And that most of them you'll either be able to plug them into your computer or into your phone, depending on what you want to use to record. Okay. And I would reach out to the host and just say, hey, I want to make sure that I'm really showing up well for your audience. Will you be sending things in advance? I've watched a couple of episodes. What should I do to make sure that I'm helping you make the best content possible? She'll probably be delighted to get that email.
Okay, great. Yeah, she's I'm like really super excited. I'm a little nervous, but I'm nervous about everything. I was nervous reading in front of kindergarten. So what,
In your pajamas, no less.
And my pajamas, exactly.
But Bill, I can reach out and ask those questions if you want.
Okay, well, she's dealing with the, some heavy family stuff right now. Her grandmother is really sick. So I'm going to wait. I'm just going to send her an email tomorrow saying, hey, just sending you love. I hear that, grandma's not doing well. So, because I saw her father on Easter Sunday, because he's moving in with my sister-in-law. So it's all,
all in the family.
That's the way it's going, Megan. My whole book is people from my past life coming out to help me. I told Gene and Kim, I feel like Jimmy Stewart and It's a Wonderful Life.
That's right.
Aw,
marvelous.
No, it's awesome. It's been great. So, well, that really helps.
Good. I'm glad.
I just want to make sure I don't, there's nothing I could do about it because I have a really heavy New York accent, and sometimes it really comes out as Kim and Jim.
Okay, there's something very important that you need to know about that, and it's that your voice is perfect. A
Okay.
lot of people are really worried about their voice and how they sound in recordings, and your voice is it's a fundamental part of who you are and your personality, and exactly the way it is completely fine.
Okay.
Your voice is great just the way it is.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Megan.
My pleasure.
I think the other thing that you mentioned, Megan, just along the lines of your voice, is listening to your voice.
Mhm.
And even if she sends these questions, oh, there we are. If she sends these questions ahead of time, that's something that you can prepare and you can practice with your answers as well, Bill. So
Right.
I've done the library podcast before, and I asked all those questions that you just were concerned about. And it was, she sent the questions ahead of time because she wanted it to be prepared more or less based on,
Right.
you know, her audience and what she was looking to get from it. And it was recorded. So it was live recorded, but they didn't play it at that exact time.
Got it. So they went in, they edited
recorded
it.
it. Yeah.
So she probably went in and sweetened it, you know, because it's sort of like the opposite, Megan, just so you know, like besides being an artist and a writer of this book, children's book, I also produce videos for nonprofits, and we have
Okay.
the opposite when we do an interview. You don't want to, sometimes I provide the questions in advance,
Mhm.
but if I go and I'm, you know, I'm sitting there with the person there and with the cameraman setting up the camera and the lights and stuff, and the person starts to talk about what they're going to, I always tell them, please, let's save it, stop.
Yep.
Let's save it for when the camera's rolling, because what's going to happen is that, you know, they might say something great and they're not going to remember what they said. We might get into a conversation. It's not going to flow the same way after we speak.
That's
And
gonna happen.
then,
That happens in podcasts too. Oh my gosh,
right.
does it ever? And like
And then,
sometimes the magic is before you hit record. It
right.
just it's the way it goes.
You know, and then sometimes what happens when you do the one-on-one interviews is that, you know, somebody, you ask a question and they just ramble and ramble and ramble and they go on and on and on. And then you go on to other questions and then you ask the same question again at the end of the interview and you get that's when you get the great answer.
Mhm.
Oh.
It's sort of like, yeah, because they're
You're
kind of
gonna be
like,
fine. You're gonna do
okay.
great. This isn't
Thank
this
you.
isn't actually your first rodeo. It just feels like your first rodeo.
That's so funny. Well, thank you. Well, I'm excited though.
Awesome.
And then for me, Megan, I actually am part of Kim's team and I do the marketing.
Nice.
So I'm helping Bill and supporting him with his marketing even after the launch. We're still continuing it. And that's really when you build it up, you have to continue it.
Yep.
So I was just thinking, you know, as we're going through everything, I mean, this is an option for a lot of authors if that's the avenue that they want to take, is not only being on podcasts, but having their own podcast, if that's something that they desire. So I'm
Right.
glad I'm here so I can, you know, have that information that you
Mhm.
shared with us today to at least bring to the table and see if it's something that they may be interested in doing. I mean, I don't
All right.
have any
Well, I'm so
connections
glad you
and
brought that up, Jean, because what I had on the next slide that I skipped because we got to chatting face to face is I've actually gotten together with another colleague of Kim's, Angie Trueblood, and we've put together a podcasting offer specifically for authors, specifically around the launch of their book. And so it's for a podcast mini season of 6 episodes and then 6 guest appearances on other shows. And we would typically arrange it to have the episodes release in advance of the book launch and then the
cool.
guest appearances go after to keep that momentum running.
That's cool.
So I have got all of the information. It's at onestonecreative.net/6and6 all written out. But Kim, I can send that to you directly if it's of interest. But that is it's a pretty sweet offer, if I don't mind saying myself. Angie doesn't usually work on a package basis. It's usually an annual commitment. So something specifically for around a launch is a pretty cool opportunity. And I mean, I think my team is great. So, but I'm biased.
I think there's this going to be the birth of the KWE podcast where Jean and Kim interview all your authors.
Ooh, I love that. Network is also a good way to go. You can have every individual author have their own podcast on the network and like kind of co-promote each other. Can be really, really fun.
Because Jean, you have nothing. Because Jean, you have nothing going on, right?
And I'm tech challenged as well, Bill. You're a producer, so I don't know how you're tech challenged, but I'm taking challenge.
Because I hire a camera person to show up with the camera. They set up the lights. I got an editor. He pushes the buttons and moves the stuff
So you
around.
just
I just go,
use
could you
your
make that a dissolve?
personality.
Could you make that a dissolve? Can we move her there and that stuff there?
You're like the puppet master.
Yeah.
The director. There you go.
There we go. There we go.
Well, this was
Oh
very
my
cool.
Yeah,
I'm so
thank
glad.
you.
Yay. Megan, one of the things that I really love, having been on both sides, having been a podcast guest, I was about to say ghost. I have not been a ghost on a podcast. I have been a guest. And also, I don't know if I ever shared this with Jean and Bill, but I do a podcast with my co-host Nikita. We've kind of taken a hiatus, but it's called Sociable Scribes. But Megan, I'm going to get your help with it because we've been recording it on Zoom.
No.
She
I
said
thought I
not
saw
to
your face
do
at that point in the
Kim.
presentation.
She said, don't record on Zoom.
Which she didn't know that,
and I'm
though.
like, oh,
Why she hit the
Okay.
record button.
Let me give you some context for why. Because Zoom is amazing for what we're doing right now. You know, it's great for having a conversation, for connecting, for sharing information. But what you're hearing from your computer or from your headset is not how my voice sounds. Because it's compressed, because it's voice over IP, and it doesn't capture the full range of sound. So it's missing kind of the lovely low lights and the nice top highlights. And it's just compressed. And there's nothing the best sound engineer in the world can do with that. It's just, it's gone. It's no. You can make Zoom, like if it's Zoom or nothing, use Zoom. But make sure you're recording each speaker on their own track. So at least you can get rid of, like, say, if I've got a dog barking next to me and you're talking, Kim, it can be removed from my track without interfering with yours. But you know, to level up the sound quality, you do want to, it's got kind of the name always makes me go, a dual-ended recorder is what you want to be using. And so that's going to be something that records my voice on my end and your voice on your end, and then combines them afterwards. Much higher quality. So you've got your Zencaster, your Riverside, Squadcast. They're all basically the same, but they do that kind of that local recording and then combination afterwards.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
Pleasure.
So one of the things that occurred to me as you were talking about, if you were a podcast host and you would want to think about, like, I loved your example about meditation. I think working backwards and being a podcast guest, you could do a similar kind of thing. Like, for instance, Bill, I'm going to use your book.
Okay.
The number of topics that are related to your book, amusement parks, roller coasters, if there are podcasts about roller coasters, also family,
right?
Grandpa Joe and Billy are the two characters. There could be podcasts potentially maybe about like families and family dynamics.
Positive mindset.
There we go.
Yep.
Exactly.
Right.
So Megan, are we on the right track?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Could not love it more. Yeah. And so then finding those podcasts can be a little challenging. Podchaser is a really good resource for finding podcasts.
Okay. Podchaser. Cool.
Yeah, so you can find out the you can search for anything. So you can search for roller coasters, and you could find episodes and podcasts about this. You can search. It's not like a perfect discoverability engine, but it's better than it's better than Google.
Excellent.
And yeah, that's exactly the way to approach it. Because then when you are pitching yourself to be a guest on other podcasts, having a couple of ideas for what you can talk about and having listened to a couple of episodes, so you know sort of the theme and the structure, really makes you stand out. Because most pitches, they get trashed because they're copy paste and it's just spray and pray. And Kim, I'm sure you've talked to Angie about this, but they like really work on making sure that it's a correct pitch that is appropriate for the podcast, appropriate for the audience, and shows that you've thought about it. And, you know, get the host name right. Key tip right there. Get the host name right.
Got that, Bill?
Awesome.
Very important.
Oh my goodness. Megan, this has been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Megan, I
Yay.
got one quick question for you. Is there a brand of the lab microphone that you recommend? That's a good one.
Yes, there is. And I'm thinking of a word that is not the name of the brand. 1 second.
That's okay.
Okay, no worries.
It'll come to you. Ooh.
Tonight when you're sleeping.
Yeah, probably. Okay, yes. You can get away with a Logitech.
Oh, what is it called?
So you can I think Logitech. They do headsets like
Logitech.
the one I'm wearing. That
So
would
like
be on the
LOGITECH.
Yeah, let me double check that. Yeah, but you can get sorry, here you asked me a specific text question and I lose it.
That's all
Just
right.
type in lavalier mic. Anything
Okay.
that goes into both your phone and your computer, that's what you'll want to watch for, because some of them are just phone or just computer. So you'll want one that has an adapter. You can get like a Rode or a Shure lav mic. Those are the high-end brands that I mentioned. They'll cost a little more, about probably $80 to $100, but it'll be a really good quality lav mic. So maybe not for your first one, but anything that just plugs right into your phone is going to be an improvement over your laptop or kind of naked phone audio.
Cool. Thank you.
No problem.
Great question, Bill.
Very good question. I'm
Excellent.
gonna get my tech list prepared next time.
I'm thinking, trying to think ahead.
I love it. Bill, I think you're going to knock their socks off if you've listened to the show, because I think that shows you've done your homework.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm definitely going to do that, especially if I want to hear that Eric Larson
Yeah.
podcast, because I'm a big fan of his writing. So
His writing too.
Yeah,
What?
it's if you
Pretty
can like
cool.
if you can jump onto a recording as a guest and say, hey, I just listened to the conversation you had with Lars. I loved when you talked about, and then like mention a bit, like she's gonna remember you and it's gonna be a great conversation.
good. But that's part of Gene and Kim know I worked in advertising, so I'm very brand loyal. So when I was working with Autism Speaks, we had a thing where Tommy Hilfiger came on board, and we did a PSA with him. And when I went to the meeting, I was in full Tommy Hilfiger clothes, from the vest, the tie, the shirt, the pants. And at the end of the meeting, he goes, "Nice outfit."
Yeah, he'll
Well
remember you.
done.
Yeah.
And I was going there with like BBDO, one of the biggest advertising agencies. I said, "You guys got to wear some Tommy." Nobody wore Tommy. I was the only one that wore Tommy Hilfiger close to this meeting. It was like the big meeting to get him to say yes.
Yep.
Anyway.
Yeah. So now we need Grandpa Joe attire.
Well, we're working on that. I got to get those Etsy shirts made.
There you go.
See, start selling.
Excellent. Oh
Well,
my
this is
goodness.
fantastic. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad.
Yeah. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you so much,
Really great.
Megan, and great to see you, Gene and Bill. And for anybody who's watching this as a recording, thank you for watching our replay, and let us know if you have any questions. But thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye.